The morning sun streamed through the large glass panels of the tech building in the heart of Silicon Valley, reflecting off the mirror-like polished marble floors. James Carter, 35, stepped through the revolving doors with a radiant smile on his face, a smile that had become his trademark during his 5 years working here. He wore a neatly pressed light blue shirt, his black leather shoes gleaming under the light from the LED lamps hanging high on the ceiling. In his hand was a cup of black coffee, which he jokingly called his fuel for dreamers. James was no ordinary employee. He was the one his colleagues turned to for advice, a pat on the back, or simply a word of encouragement during stressful workdays. But today, Tuesday, March 25th, 2025, no one knew that smile was about to be extinguished. James entered the elevator, nodding hello to Sarah, the blonde in turn clutching her laptop as if it were a life raft. "Good morning, Sarah. You look stressed today?" he asked, his voice as warm as a soft jazz melody. Sarah forced a smile, her blue eyes showing a hint of worry. "New project, Mr. James. The boss wants it done by Friday, and I don't even know where to start." James took a sip of his coffee, tilting his head in thought. "Find a quiet corner, write down everything you know, then organize it. Don't let the pressure swallow you. You can do it." Sarah nodded, her eyes lighting up as if she had found an escape route. The elevator chimed, the doors opening to the 17th floor, where James worked as a data analyst. He stepped out, unaware that this brief conversation would be his last memory with Sarah as a colleague. The open office space stretched out before him like a modern painting. Pristine white workstations, brightly lit computer screens, and the steady tapping of keyboards like the heartbeat of a giant machine. In the corner of the room, the software engineering team was engaged in a lively debate about a faulty line of code, their voices echoing through the soundproof glass panels. James waved hello to Marcus, his best friend at the company, a tall black man with dreadlocks pulled back neatly. Marcus was sitting perched on a chair, headphones on, mouthing along to a rap song that James guessed was by Kendrick Lamar. "Yo, Carter, basketball tonight? Lakers versus Warriors. Can't miss it." Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the office noise. James laughed. "We'll see, man. If my wife doesn't make me go grocery shopping, I'll be there." They both burst into laughter, their voices blending into the vibrant atmosphere of the 17th floor. James placed his coffee cup on his desk, the small corner he had turned into his personal nest. A family photo taken in Oakland Park, a tiny cactus that his daughter, Mia, had given him for Father's Day, and a handwritten card from a former colleague thanking him for helping her through a period of depression. He turned on his computer, the screen lighting up with a series of charts and work figures that he had excelled at for the past 5 years. James was not only good at analyzing data, he also had the ability to turn dry numbers into compelling stories, helping the leadership team make strategic decisions. His latest report on user trends had helped the company increase revenue by 15% in the previous quarter, an achievement he quietly took pride in but never boasted about. But today something felt off. He sensed it in the air, a strange silence interspersed with a familiar noise. As he was typing his password into his computer, the landline phone on his desk rang, the sharp sound cutting through his thoughts. James picked up the receiver, his voice still friendly. "Hello, James Carter speaking." The voice on the other end was the dry tone of Linda, the HR director's secretary. "James, Helen wants to see you right now. Conference room 3. No explanation, no hint of emotion. James frowned, put down the receiver, a feeling of unease rising in his chest. Helen White, the HR director, was not someone easy to approach. In his 5 years, she had rarely spoken to him directly, except for company-wide meetings where she delivered speeches in a monotonous voice like a radio announcer. He stood up, adjusted his collar, and walked towards conference room 3. On the way, He caught the eyes of his colleagues. Some looked at him with curiosity. Others quickly turned away as if hiding something. When he pushed the door open and stepped inside, Helen was already seated at the head of the table, holding a file, her icy blue eyes fixed on him. She was about 50 years old, her blonde hair meticulously dyed, wearing an expensive, figure-hugging gray suit. On the table was a gleaming Mont Blanc pen, which James had heard was a gift from her husband, a famous lawyer in San Francisco. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. "Sit down, James," Helen said, her voice cold but with a hint of tension. James pulled out a chair, sat down, trying to maintain his composure, even though his heart was pounding. "What's this about, Mess? White?" he asked, his voice as calm as ever. Helen pushed the file towards him, not bothering to make eye contact. "The company is restructuring. We have to make some staff reductions. Today is your last day here." Her words fell like a blow, sharp and uncompromising. James blinked, his brain reeling, trying to process the information he had just heard. "Reductions? But I don't understand." The quarterly report. Helen cut him off, her voice rising slightly. "This is a decision from the leadership team. There's nothing to discuss. You'll receive 2 months severance pay. Linda will walk you through the procedures." James sat in silence, his hands gripping the armrests of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wanted to shout, to ask why, to demand an explanation. But he didn't. He had learned from a young age, in the slums of East Oakland, that sometimes silence was the only way to maintain dignity. He looked at Helen, trying to find a flicker of emotion on her face, a hint of regret, a moment of hesitation, but there was nothing but coldness. And then, in a fleeting moment, he realized what he didn't want to believe. Helen's gaze was not just the indifference of a manager. It was contempt, a deep-seated prejudice that he had faced too many times in his life, prejudice about his skin color, about his voice, about who he was. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, standing up, his voice so calm it surprised even himself. He turned and walked out of the conference room, each step feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Helen watched his retreating back, her lips pressed tightly together, her hand unconsciously twisting the Mont Blanc pen. She didn't know that this decision, rooted in personal bias that she had masked under the guise of business strategy, would soon become the biggest nightmare of her career. When James returned to his desk, Marcus was waiting for him with a worried look on his face. "What's going on, man? I saw you leave with MS. White." James didn't answer immediately. He opened his drawer, took out the family photo and the tiny cactus, and placed them in the box that Linda had just brought him. "I've been fired," he said, his voice so low that Marcus had to lean in to hear him clearly. "What? Fired? Are you kidding me?" Marcus almost shouted, attracting glances from across the office. James shook his head, offering a sad smile. "No joke. They said it's reductions. I don't understand either." Marcus slammed his hand on the desk, his eyes red. "Reductions my ass. You're the best here. There's definitely something wrong." But James didn't want to argue. He was too tired of the invisible battles he had fought his whole life, the suspicious glances, the veiled comments. The doors slammed shut simply because he was a black man in a world that wasn't yet ready to fully accept him. He patted Marcus on the shoulder, saying softly, "Don't worry about me. I'll be okay." Then he picked up the box, walked out of the office, leaving behind 5 years of dedication and a heartache he hadn't fully processed yet. As the elevator doors closed, James looked at his reflection in the glass. He didn't know that this fateful day was just the beginning of a larger story, a story that would make the whole world look at him with different eyes. A week after James Carter left the magnificent glass building in Silicon Valley, the air in the office still carried a lingering scent of his unsweetened black coffee, a fragrance that Marcus, his closest friend, now recognized as a luxurious memory. The 17th floor had changed. James's loud laughter no longer echoed among the pristine white desks, and the small corner that had been his nest was now empty, with only a faint mark on the desk where his coffee cup used to sit. Colleagues whispered to each other, unspoken questions hanging in the air. Why James? Why not someone else? But no one dared to speak up. No one dared to question Helen White directly, the blonde woman with the icy blue eyes who sat in her glass office on the top floor, looking down at the crowd like a queen on her throne. Outside, the digital world was quietly seething. On Tuesday morning, April 1st, 2025, an anonymous X account with the handle at TruthSeeker2025 posted a short but sharp tweet. Major tech company in Silicon Valley just fired a silent hero. James Carter is not just an employee, he's the founder of Compassion USA, an organization that has saved thousands of homeless people and victims of racism. Who is behind this decision? That tweet, just 280 characters long, exploded like a bomb. Within hours, the hashtag Justice for James was trending on X, accompanied by hundreds of outraged comments. One person wrote, "Did they fire him because he's black or because he was too good and made them look bad?" Another posted a picture of James standing in a crowd in Oakland, holding a sign that read Justice for All, with the caption, "This is the person they called unnecessary." In the office, the news spread like wildfire. Marcus was the first to see the post while scrolling through X during his lunch break. He sat bolt upright in his chair, his cold-cut sandwich falling onto the desk, his eyes wide in disbelief at what he was reading. Compassion USA? James is the founder? He muttered, his voice trembling. Marcus knew James was a good person. He had seen James bring food to the homeless near the subway station, had heard him talk about his difficult days in East Oakland, but this was beyond his imagination. James had never boasted, never mentioned the secret organization he ran under the pseudonym JC. Hope. Marcus took a screenshot of the post, immediately sent it to the internal chat group of his close friends at the company, with the message, "You guys read this." I'm not kidding. The reaction in the chat group exploded. Sarah, the blonde intern, replied first. "Oh my God, mister. James is JC. Hope. I used to read his articles about racism on the Compassion USA blog without knowing it was him." Next was Diego, a software engineer of Latin descent. Holy crap, he kept that quiet. But why did they fire him? Something's not right. Finally, Priya, a marketing specialist of Indian descent, typed a short line. Helen. I bet it was her. No one disagreed. They all knew Helen White, with her fake smile and eyes that always looked down on those who weren't like her, didn't like James. But they had never thought she would dare push him out of the company just because of personal prejudice until today. Meanwhile, at James's home, a small but cozy apartment on the outskirts of Oakland, he was sitting on the sofa, holding the family photo he had brought back from the office. Beside him was Mia, his 8-year-old daughter with big eyes and neatly braided hair. "Dad, why don't you go to work anymore?" Mia asked, her voice innocent but sharp as a knife to James's heart. He forced a smile, stroking her hair. "Dad's just taking a little break, sweetie. But don't worry, I'll find a new job." He didn't want Mia to know the truth that he had been fired, that he felt like the whole world had turned against him. But as Mia ran into her room to get her coloring box, James's phone lit up with dozens of notifications from X. He frowned, opened the app, and a Truth Seeker 2025's tweet hit him like a lightning bolt. "What the hell?" James muttered, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the comments. He had never publicly revealed his role in Compassion USA. He wanted the organization to be a silent flame, untainted by personal glory. But now his secret was exposed, and he didn't know who was behind it or why. He texted Marcus, Have you seen that tweet? Who did this? Marcus replied immediately, I don't know, man. But the whole world is talking about you. You're a superhero. James didn't laugh. He felt exposed, as if the protective shell he had painstakingly built had been stripped away without his permission. At the same time, at the office, Helen White was sitting in conference room 3, ironically, the same room where she had fired James a week ago. In front of her was a group of senior managers, all looking tense. Who leaked this? Helen asked, her voice sharp but unable to mask her panic. No one answered. Her hands twisted the Mont Blanc pen faster than usual, a habit when she lost control. We need an official statement. Say this was a strategic decision, unrelated to any individual, she ordered, her eyes scanning the group like a hunting hawk. But deep down, Helen knew the truth. She didn't dislike James because of his work, but because he was black with a deep voice that she had once called too loud, because he didn't bow down to her veiled comments, because he made her feel uneasy in the perfect world she had built for herself. That afternoon, a young IT employee named Kyle, who always worked quietly in the corner of the office, decided to dig deeper. He secretly accessed Helen's internal emails in action that violated company policy, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. Among hundreds of emails, he found a thread between Helen and another director, Robert Klein. A line from Helen's email, written 3 months ago, sent chills down Kyle's spine. James Carter is good, but he doesn't fit our culture. His voice and attitude, too different. We need someone more aligned. Kyle took a screenshot, immediately sent it to Marcus with a message. This is the proof. Helen hates him because he's black. Marcus read it, his hands shaking with anger. He forwarded the email to the chat group, and the whole group decided to act. They couldn't let James be treated unfairly without anyone knowing the truth. Priya, with her marketing skills, suggested, post this on X. Let the whole world see Helen's true colors. Sarah hesitated. But what if they trace it back to us? Marcus growled. So what? James deserves to be protected more than this company. Finally, they agreed. Kyle, using his anonymous account, posted the email on X with the caption, "This is why James Carter was fired. Racism right in the heart of Silicon Valley." That post was the last straw. Within hours, thousands of people retweeted it, the hashtag expose Helen White appearing alongside hashtag Justice for James. Journalists began contacting the company, demanding comments. At home, James sat in front of his laptop screen, watching the storm of public opinion engulf his life. He hadn't wanted this, he just wanted to live quietly, do the work he loved, and help others through Compassion USA. But now he had no choice. The truth was out, and it would drag both Helen White and the company down to a depth they hadn't anticipated. As night fell, Helen stood alone in the empty office, looking through the glass at the city glowing with lights. She didn't know that the decision to fire James, stemming from the prejudice she had hidden for so many years, was turning into a fire that would consume her reputation. And James, the man she had once looked down on, was about to become the symbol of a much larger battle. The sunlight faded in the Silicon Valley sky, obscured by gray clouds rolling in from the San Francisco Bay. Inside James Carter's small apartment on the outskirts of Oakland, the peacefulness of an ordinary morning had been shattered by the incessant ringing of his phone. James sat on the sofa, holding a mug of hot tea that Lisa had just made, his tired eyes fixed on the laptop screen glowing in front of him. Since Truth Seeker 2025's post and the leaked email from Helen White, his life had been swept into a whirlwind he couldn't control. The screen displayed hundreds of notifications from X, each tweet like a stone thrown into a still lake, creating ripples that spread endlessly. On X, the hashtag Justice for James had climbed to the #1 spot globally, with over 1 million mentions in just 24 hours. A user named Maya the Truth wrote, James Carter was fired because he's black in a company that wants to maintain a pure white image. This isn't downsizing, this is racism. The post included a photo of James standing in a crowd at a charity event in Oakland, holding a microphone, his face radiant with a warm smile. That photo, taken 2 years ago when he was secretly running Compassion USA, had now become a symbol of injustice. Another user, with the handle Black Tech Rising, added, Silicon Valley always talks about diversity, but when a black man like James shines, they find a way to extinguish him. Who is Helen White to decide who fits? In the company office, the atmosphere was as heavy as the day before a storm. The 17th floor, where James used to work, now resembled a silent battlefield, where everyone avoided eye contact. Marcus sat at his desk, his headphones resting loosely around his neck, but he wasn't playing music. His hands were clenched, his eyes glued to his phone screen, where the latest tweet from Kyle had just appeared. They thought firing James would go unnoticed. But the truth always finds a way out. Marcus smirked, a bitter smile on his face. He knew Kyle had risked everything by posting Helen's email on X, but he hadn't expected it to create such a violent storm. Lena, sitting a few desks away, whispered, What do you think they'll do next? The company can't stay silent forever. Marcus shook his head. They'll pretend to apologize, then blame someone else. But this time, I'm not letting them off easy. On the 18th floor, in Helen White's spacious glass office, the chaos had seeped through the cold facade she always maintained. In front of her was the company's communications team, 5 people with strained faces and open laptops. On the large wall-mounted screen, a chart displayed the reach of the Justice for James hashtag across social media platforms, a steep curve like a volcano about to erupt. We need to do something immediately, Brian, the head of communications, said, his voice trembling. Reporters from CNN, TechCrunch, and even NBC are calling nonstop. If we don't respond, they'll write their own story. Helen sat in silence, twisting her Mont Blanc pen at an unusually fast pace, her pale blue eyes staring blankly into space. Write a statement, she said, her voice dry. Say this was a business decision, unrelated to any individual. We respect all our employees. Brian frowned, hesitant. MS. White, with all due respect. The leaked email has changed everything. People don't believe this is just business. They're calling you a racist. The atmosphere in the room thickened. Helen slammed the pen on the desk, the sharp sound making everyone jump. I don't care what they call me, she shouted, losing her usual composure for the first time. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what's good for the company. James Carter wasn't a good fit, that's all. But deep down, she knew that her words were just a facade to hide the truth. She didn't like him, not because of his abilities, but because he was a black man who dared to stand up straight in a world she wanted to control. The company's official statement was posted on X that afternoon. We regret the departure of James Carter. This was part of a restructuring plan, which does not reflect his personal value. We are committed to building a diverse and equitable workplace. But the response from the community was a new wave of outrage. A user named Justice Now 2025 replied immediately. Diverse? Equitable? You fire a black hero for not fitting in and call it restructuring? Don't make a joke of yourselves. Another posted a screenshot of Helen's email with a caption, This is the truth you wanted to hide. Helen White is the racist, not James is the problem. At home, James sat quietly, watching the storm of public opinion engulf his life. Lisa came into the room, holding a plate of toast, her face worried. Are you okay, James? Your phone's been ringing nonstop since morning. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. I don't know anymore. Lisa, I didn't want this. I just wanted to work, take care of you and Mia, and continue Compassion USA quietly. Lisa put the plate down, sat next to him, taking his hand. But you didn't do anything wrong. They're the ones who are wrong. Everyone is on your side. James offered a weak smile, but inside he was a mess. He didn't want to become a symbol, didn't want to be thrust into the spotlight. But now there was no turning back. In the afternoon, a video went viral on X, making everything explode even further. It was footage from a charity event 2 years prior, where James stood in a diverse crowd, Black, Latino, Asian, talking about compassion and solidarity. His voice was deep and powerful. We're not defined by the color of our skin or where we were born. We are defined by what we do for each other. The video ended with a scene of him hugging a homeless boy, his eyes shining with hope. The person who posted the video, an account named Oakland Voice, wrote, "This is the James Carter that the company called not fitting in. They were afraid of him because he embodies something they will never understand: compassion." The storm of public opinion was not limited to online. Outside the company building, a small group of protesters began to gather, holding handwritten signs: "Justice for James" and "End racism in tech." The shouts echoed through the thick glass, penetrating the 17th floor office, where Marcus and Lena stood watching through the window. "You see that?" Marcus said, a hint of pride in his voice. "This is for James. He deserves this." Lena nodded, but her eyes were worried. But what if they retaliate? Huck could get in trouble for leaking the email. Marcus turned, looking her straight in the eye. "So what? If no one stands up, this system will stay the same forever." James did his part. Now it's our turn. In Helen's office, the phone on her desk rang incessantly, but she didn't answer it. In front of her was a draft of the second statement that the communications team had just sent, but she couldn't be bothered to read it. She stood up, walked to the window, looking down at the growing crowd below. The chant "Helen White resign" echoed up, sharp as a knife. She pursed her lips, her hands gripping the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. She hadn't expected that firing James, an action she thought was small and discreet, would turn into a firestorm that would consume her reputation. But she didn't regret it, not because she was right, but because she couldn't admit she was wrong. As dusk fell, James stood on the small balcony of his apartment, looking out at the bustling streets of Oakland below. His phone lit up with a message from Marcus. "Man, the whole world is behind you. Don't give up." James didn't reply. He looked up at the sky, where the gray clouds were gradually breaking apart, revealing the last rays of the day. He didn't know that this storm was just beginning. It would sweep up even deeper secrets, older wounds, in a battle he hadn't chosen but couldn't avoid. The faint light of early morning seeped through the gaps in the blinds of the 17th floor office, where the white desks now bore a thin layer of unease. The storm of public opinion outside was still raging, with the hashtags #Justice for James and #Expose Helen White continuing to dominate X. But inside the company, another battle was quietly brewing. James Carter, the man who had once been the center of unity here, had now become a name people only dared to whisper. But that silence didn't last long. The cracks within the organization began to show, and they were deeper than anyone imagined. Marcus sat at his desk, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes staring at a photo of James with the group at the Christmas party 2 years ago, James's smile radiant in the crowd, a glass of red wine in his hand, his eyes shining with joy. Now, that photo was like a painful reminder of what had been lost. Lena approached, holding a cup of coffee, her voice soft. "Are you okay, Marcus? You've been out of it since yesterday." Marcus sighed, turning to look at her. "I'm not okay, Lena. James is my brother. Do you think I can stand by and watch him be treated like this?" Lena placed the cup down, sitting on the edge of the desk, her eyes behind thick glasses reflecting sympathy. I understand. But you see, the whole world is on his side. The company can't ignore it forever. But not everyone thought like Lena. In the other corner of the office, a group of white employees, those who had always been loyal to Helen White, gathered around Greg's desk, a tall software engineer with light brown hair and a deep voice. Greg tapped his fingers lightly on the desk, his eyes scanning the small crowd. Listen to me, guys. James is good. No one denies that. But the way he's turned this into a drama is too much. Company downsizing is normal. Why make such a big deal out of it? Sarah, the blonde intern whom James had encouraged, stood nearby, frowning. Greg, didn't you see MS? White's email. She said, Mister. James didn't fit in because of his voice and attitude. That's not downsizing, that's discrimination. Greg shrugged, scoffing. Sarah, you're young, so you're too sensitive. MS. White was just telling the truth. James is loud. He jokes around in a street style. Not everyone likes that. Greg's words were like a cold wind blowing through the office, highlighting the divisions that had long been hidden. Marcus heard him, his hands clenching the armrests of his chair, but he didn't get up immediately. He knew Greg, a guy who always prided himself on his sense of fairness, but never understood the battles that black people like him and James had to face. Lena, however, couldn't keep quiet. She stepped forward, her voice sharp. What did you just say, Greg? You think James was fired because he's loud? Do you even know what he's done for this company? Or do you just see his skin color and think he doesn't deserve it? Greg's face flushed, but he didn't back down. Don't label me a racist, Lena. I'm just telling the truth. The company needs professionals, not people who turn everything into a race issue. The argument quickly drew the attention of the entire 17th floor. A few people stood up, forming two distinct factions. One side supporting Greg, arguing that James and people like Marcus were too sensitive. The other side, including Lena, Diego, Priya, and a few others, outraged by the obvious injustice. Diego, the software engineer of Latin descent, stepped in, his voice trembling with anger. Greg, do you think we don't see it? Helen once told me to speak less Spanish in team meetings. She doesn't like anyone who isn't like her white, blonde, with a standard American accent. James isn't the first person she's targeted. Priya nodded, adding, and she asked me why I don't wear sari to maintain my culture. If that's not discrimination, what is? The atmosphere in the office became stifling, as if all the resentment that had been suppressed for years was now erupting at once. Marcus stood up, stepping between the two factions, his voice deep but powerful. Listen to me, guys. James isn't just my friend, he's the best here. He was fired not because of his work, but because Helen couldn't stand the fact that a black man like him was more successful than she expected. If you think that's being too sensitive, then you're blind. Greg opened his mouth to retort, but Marcus held up his hand to stop him. I'm not finished. You guys can sit here and defend Helen, but me and the others aren't going to be silent anymore. The argument ended in heavy silence, but it had planted the seeds for a bold plan. After work, Marcus, Lena, Diego, Priya, and Kyle, the IT employee who had leaked the email, gathered in a quiet corner of the company's basement, where the servers hummed like the breathing of a giant beast. Lena spoke first. We can't let things stop here. Public opinion outside is hot, but inside the company, there are still people covering up the truth. We need to do something. Kyle nodded, tapping lightly on his laptop. I can find more evidence. Helen's email isn't the only thing. I've seen her send memos to the leadership, all with veiled comments about excessive diversity in the team. Diego scoffed. She thinks we're a threat to her pure white world. Priya, with the sharp mind of a marketing specialist, suggested, we organize a closed-door meeting, invite those who have been treated unfairly by Helen, collect their stories, then send them to the leadership. If they don't act, We'll make everything public. Marcus nodded, his eyes lighting up. Good, but we have to be careful. Helen has eyes everywhere. The meeting ended with a firm handshake between the five, a silent commitment that they would fight for James and for themselves. 2 days later, the closed-door meeting took place in a small, rarely used room on the 15th floor. More than a dozen employees, Black, Asian, Latino, sat around the table, their eyes both worried and determined. A Nigerian engineer named Ade recounted. Helen once told me to integrate more because I wore traditional clothing on company culture day. She thought I was showing off. A Chinese finance specialist, May, added, she asked me why I couldn't be less Asian when I objected to a decision in a meeting. I think she hates anyone who isn't like her. Story after story piled up, each word like a knife digging deeper into the picture of discrimination that Helen had painted for years. Marcus recorded everything, his hands trembling with anger, but also with hope. When the meeting ended, he stood up, his voice resonating. We're not just doing this for James. We're doing this for ourselves, for those who come next. Helen and this system have to change. The group nodded, their eyes shining with determination. Priya compiled a detailed report from the testimonies, sending it directly to the leadership via anonymous email with the subject line, "The Truth About Helen White." But they didn't stop there. Kyle, with his tech skills, stored everything on a secret hard drive, ready to go public if the company tried to cover it up. Meanwhile, Helen White sat in her 18th floor office, holding her phone, her voice trembling as she spoke to Robert Klein, the CEO. Robert, we need to control this. The employees are in revolt. The public is going crazy. I can't work like this. Robert, his voice deep and cold, replied, Helen, you caused this. Your email is a disaster. The board is meeting to decide your fate. You should prepare yourself. Helen hung up, her face ashen. She hadn't expected that the prejudices she had hidden for so many years were now turning back to bite her from the inside. As night fell, Marcus stood outside the company parking lot, looking up at the brightly lit glass building. He texted James, "Man, we're fighting for you. Things are about to change." At home, James read the message, his hand gripping his phone tightly. He didn't know the details of the internal battle, but he could sense that a fire was burning, not just for him, but for an entire system that needed to be renewed. The faint light of early morning faded in the Silicon Valley sky, obscured by gray clouds rolling in from afar. In James Carter's small apartment on the outskirts of Oakland, the usual tranquility had been replaced by the incessant ringing of his phone. James sat on the sofa, holding a cup of cold tea, his tired eyes gazing out the window. Since the secret of his role in Compassion USA was exposed, and then Helen White's discriminatory email went viral, his life had become the center of a storm he didn't desire. But today, he decided not to run anymore. He would face it, not for himself, but for the people standing behind him. The laptop on the table lit up with a new notification, an invitation for an online interview from a popular YouTube program, Voices of Change, with millions of followers. The host, a black woman named Aisha Brooks, had messaged him directly on X. "James, we want to hear your story. The world needs to know who you are." James hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, but not typing anything. Lisa entered, holding a plate of freshly baked cookies, the scent of vanilla gently easing the tense atmosphere. "You should do this, James," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Not because you want fame, but because you can inspire others." James looked at his wife, then at the family photo on the shelf, Mia's smile, a reminder that he couldn't remain silent forever. He nodded, typing back, "Okay, I'll do it." The interview took place in the afternoon, in the small living room of James's apartment, where he placed his laptop on an old wooden table. Aisha appeared on the screen, her natural curly hair and radiant smile making James feel less tense. "Hello, James," she said, her voice warm. "Thank you for agreeing to join us. The whole world is talking about you, but we want to hear from you directly. What happened?" James took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He began to tell his story, his voice deep but clear, like a river flowing over hard rocks. "I grew up in East Oakland, where every day was a fight," he said, his eyes looking into the distance. "My mother worked 2 jobs to support me and my sister, but she never let us think we were victims. I learned that if I wanted to change things, I had to do something, not just wait. I went to college, then worked at that tech company for 5 years. I love the work, I love my colleagues. But then I was fired. They said it was downsizing, but I knew it wasn't." Aisha tilted her head, asking, "What do you mean?" James offered a sad smile. "They didn't like me not because I was bad at my job, but because I was a black man who dared to stand up straight. I didn't bow my head, didn't talk the way they wanted. And Helen White, the one who fired me, made it clear in that email. I didn't fit in." The atmosphere in the interview became heavy, but James didn't stop. He talked about Compassion USA, the organization he had quietly built to help the homeless and victims of racism. "I didn't want anyone to know I was behind it," he said. "I just wanted to help others quietly. But now everything has changed." Aisha nodded, her eyes reflecting sympathy. "Are you angry, James? Angry at the company? Angry at Helen?" He was silent for a moment, then replied, "I used to be angry, but not anymore. I forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because I don't want to carry that burden. I just wanted to learn to see people, not skin color." James's words were like a ray of light piercing through the screen, touching millions of hearts watching live. Comments on the live stream flooded in. "This man is a symbol of compassion. Helen White should be ashamed. James Carter is our hope." The video quickly went viral, transcending YouTube, appearing on X, TikTok, and even the evening news. An X user wrote, "Listening to James made me cry. He forgives after everything they did. Who is stronger than him?" Another posted, "That company doesn't deserve him. James is the future." In the company office, the reaction was swift. The leadership team, under pressure from public opinion and internal revolt led by Marcus, held an emergency meeting. Helen White sat at the end of the table, her face ashen, her hand no longer holding her familiar Mont Blanc. Pen had been forgotten somewhere in her panic. Robert Klein, the CEO, stood at the head of the table, his voice deep and cold. "We are losing control," he said, his eyes scanning the managers. "James Carter has just turned himself into a hero online, and we've become the villains. The public is demanding Helen's dismissal, and the employees in the company are also turning against us." Another director, Linda Hayes, interjected, "What should we do?" Another apology isn't enough. They want concrete action. Helen looked up, her voice trembling but trying to maintain a tough facade. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just doing what was best for the company. James didn't fit in. I said that from the beginning." Robert turned, his gaze sharp as a knife. "Helen, can't you see? Your email is the proof. You let personal prejudice guide your decision, and now the whole world knows it. The board has decided. We will invite James back with a higher position, maybe middle management. That's the only way to save our reputation." Helen slammed her hand on the table, shouting, "You're all crazy. Invite him back. After everything he's caused." But no one supported her. The other director's eyes were cold, as if she had become a burden that needed to be removed. News of the offer quickly reached James via an official email from Linda Hayes, sent immediately after the meeting. "We apologize for recent misunderstandings," the email read. "We value your contributions and would like to invite you back as a project manager with a higher salary." James read it, put down his phone, not replying immediately. Lisa approached, reading over his shoulder, frowning. Do they think you'll go back after everything they did? James sighed, walking out onto the balcony. He looked down at the streets of Oakland, where children were playing basketball on the sidewalk, their laughter echoing between the old buildings. They don't understand. Lisa, he said. This isn't about money or position. This is about dignity. I'm not going back. That evening, James posted a short but powerful tweet. Thank you to the company for the offer, but I decline. I don't need their seat. I will continue Compassion USA because that's where I belong. The tweet was like a second bomb exploding on X. People retweeted it thousands of times, accompanied by messages of support. James doesn't need them. They need him, a true man of principle. One user posted a photo of James from the interview with the caption, "This is real leadership, not someone sitting in a glass office." James's decision was not just a rejection of the company, but also the inspiration for a larger plan. After the interview, he received dozens of messages from charities, social enterprises, and individuals wanting to support Compassion USA. An anonymous donor emailed, promising a large donation if James expanded the organization. Sitting with Lisa and Mia in the living room, he began to sketch out ideas. A nationwide support network for people facing discrimination, not just in Oakland, but across America. I want to turn this into an opportunity, he told Lisa, his eyes shining. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been looked down on like me. Meanwhile, at the company, James's refusal was like a slap in the face to the leadership. Helen White, now completely isolated, sat alone in her office, looking out the window at the brightly lit city. Her phone rang with a message from Robert. Prepare your papers. You're being replaced. Helen didn't reply. She knew she had lost not because of James, but because of the prejudice she had never admitted. On the 17th floor, Marcus and his group Lena, Diego, Priya, Kyle gathered in the corner of the office, watching James's tweet on a phone. Marcus smiled, patting Kyle on the shoulder. You see that? He doesn't need this company. He's much bigger than that. As night fell, James stood on his balcony, a cool breeze blowing through his hair. He didn't know that this unexpected return was not just a personal victory, but also the beginning of a larger movement, where he would lead thousands of people through the darkness of injustice. The sunset painted the Oakland sky in hues of gold, the last rays of the day filtering through the old trees, illuminating the street where James Carter had grown up. In his small apartment, the atmosphere was no longer as heavy as it had been in the preceding days. Mia's laughter echoed from the living room, where she was drawing a colorful picture of a tall man with a radiant smile, standing in a crowd, holding a sign that red people are everything. Lisa sat beside her, smiling at her daughter, occasionally glancing at James, who stood on the balcony, holding a cup of unsweetened black coffee. He looked down at the street, where Black, Latino, and Asian children played together, their joyful shouts mingling with the distant sound of car horns. This was the world he wanted to protect, and now he had the opportunity to do so on a larger scale than ever before. Since James declined the offer to return to the company, his life had turned a new page. Compassion USA, the organization he had once run in the shadows, was now the center of attention. After the interview on Voices of Change and his declaration of independence on X, a flood of donors reached out, from ordinary individuals sending a few dollars online to large corporations pledging millions. One morning, when James opened his email, he saw a message from a well-known charity in California. We would like to donate $5 million for you to expand Compassion USA. You are the person we trust. James read it, put down his phone, his hand trembling. Lisa approached, hugging him from behind. You did it, James. This is what you've always dreamed of. Meanwhile, at the magnificent glass building in Silicon Valley, The company was plunged into an unprecedented crisis. James's refusal was not just a slap in the face to their reputation, but also the spark for internal collapse. The leadership team, after an emergency meeting, fired Helen White. Robert Klein, the CEO, stood before the 18th floor conference room, announcing coldly, "Helen will leave the company immediately. We cannot keep someone who has damaged the organization's image." Helen sat in silence, her face ashen, her pale blue eyes now clouded with defeat. She didn't protest, not because she agreed, but because she knew she had no allies left. When she left the office for the last time, carrying her expensive leather bag, no one saw her off. The sound of her footsteps echoed alone in the hallway, like a sad melody closing a chapter. But Helen didn't surrender in silence. On her way home, she posted a tweet from her personal account. "I was fired because of cancel culture, not because I was wrong. James Carter and that mob destroyed my career." The tweet ignited a fierce controversy on X. Some people supported her, arguing that she was a victim of excessive political correctness. Helen was just doing her job. Why should she be punished for telling the truth? But the majority of the reaction was outrage. One user replied, "Telling the truth? You called a black man not a good fit and thought that was the truth? You dug your own grave." Another posted, "James forgave her, but she learned nothing." Sad. The company, in an attempt to salvage the situation, appointed a new HR director, an Indian woman named Priya Sharma, unrelated to the Priya in Marcus's group. They also announced a series of diversity and inclusion policies, but the public was not easily convinced. An article on TechCrunch wrote, "They changed the person, but not the system. James Carter exposed their rotten core, and no one will forget." Major clients began to withdraw contracts. The company's stock plummeted, and employees who had been loyal to Helen resigned one after another. Marcus, Lena, Diego, Priya, and Kyle, the group that had fought from within, decided to stay, not for the company, but to ensure that real change would happen. Marcus told the group, "We're not doing this for them. We're doing this for James and for ourselves." Meanwhile, James embarked on a new journey. With the donated funds, he expanded Compassion USA, not just in Oakland, but also in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta, cities where racism still smoldered like a fire under ashes. He hired a small team consisting of people who had been abandoned by the system, a formerly incarcerated black man who had successfully rehabilitated a Latino woman who had been homeless, an Asian youth who had been denied jobs for being not American enough. He stood before them at their first meeting, his voice deep and resonant. "We're not just helping others. We're proving that everyone deserves a chance, no matter who they are." The team nodded, their eyes shining with belief. Compassion USA quickly became a symbol of compassion and justice, with support centers springing up like mushrooms, providing food, education, and employment to those who needed it most. One afternoon, James stood in the middle of a diverse crowd at the new center in Oakland, holding a microphone, his eyes meeting each face before him. "I was once called not a good fit," he said, his voice strong but warm. "But I'm here to tell you, no one has the right to define you except yourself. We are human beings, and that's all that matters." The crowd applauded thunderously, a few people wiping away tears. A black boy about 10 years old ran up and hugged his leg, whispering, "I want to be like you when I grow up." James bent down, hugged the boy, and smiled. That moment was captured by a photographer, and the photo went viral on X with the caption, "James Carter, the man who is changing the world one step at a time." James's story didn't end there. He became a speaker at conferences, schools, and even other companies, sharing his journey and calling for change. Once, he received a message from Marcus, "Man, you're a legend. I'm proud of you." James replied, I couldn't have done it without you and the guys. Thanks, brother. He didn't forget those who had stood up for him, from Marcus's group to the millions of strangers online. Every word of support, every dollar donated, was fuel for the fire he had ignited. Meanwhile, Helen White retreated from the spotlight, living in a small apartment on the outskirts of San Francisco. She didn't apologize, didn't admit her mistakes, but she also no longer had the strength to fight. One evening, she turned on the TV, saw James on the news, cutting the ribbon at the opening of a new Compassion USA center. She turned off the TV, sat in silence in the dark, her hand clutching a glass of wine. She couldn't understand why someone like James had won, while she who had once had everything had lost it all. But deep down, she knew the answer. She had chosen the wrong battlefield and the wrong opponent. The story closes with a final image on X. James standing in a crowd in Oakland, holding up the sign "People are everything," surrounded by diverse faces, black, white, brown, yellow, all with radiant smiles. One user wrote, "This is James Carter's legacy." But how many other Jameses are being overlooked just because of their skin color? That tweet, simple but poignant, left a question hanging in the air, like a call for unfinished changes. As night fell, James sat on the sofa, Mia asleep on his shoulder, Lisa making tea in the kitchen. He looked out the window, where the street lights flickered like stars. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. The lesson from his story was not just about victory, but a reminder that compassion and truth, no matter how long they are buried, will eventually find their way to rise. The story of James Carter, from an unjustly fired employee to a symbol of compassion and justice, is not just a tale of individual struggle, but also a mirror reflecting the deep-seated issues within modern society, particularly racism and systemic injustice. Through 6 parts, from a fateful day to the remaining lesson, James's journey unfolds like a vivid book, where each chapter tells not only about him, but also about those around him, from colleagues and family to his adversaries. The meaning of the story lies in how it exposes the fragility of arrogance, the power of compassion, and the ability of an individual to change an entire system. Simultaneously, it leaves behind profound life lessons about dignity, forgiveness, and the responsibility of each person in building a more just world. Right from the first part, A Fateful Day, the story lays the groundwork for a conflict not only between James and the company, but also between him and the invisible prejudices that have permeated society for centuries. James, a black man with a warm smile and dedication to his work, is fired not for his abilities, but because he did not fit the image that Helen White, the HR director, wanted to impose. This dismissal is not just a dry administrative act, but an expression of deep-seated discrimination, where James's skin color, voice, and attitude are seen as a threat to a pure white world that Helen and people like her try to maintain. The significance here is that injustice does not always manifest as violence or harsh words. Sometimes it hides in quiet decisions, contemptuous glances, and veiled comments whose depth of injury is understood only by those who endure them. The first lesson drawn from this part is patience and dignity in adversity. James, despite being hurt, does not react with anger or violence. He chooses silence, not out of weakness, but because he understands that his worth does not depend on how others treat him. Moving to the second part, The Truth Revealed, the story shifts from personal tragedy to a broader wave of resistance. When James's secret role in Compassion USA is exposed through a post on X, along with Helen's discriminatory email, the world begins to see him differently, not as a victim, but as a silent hero. The meaning of this part lies in the power of truth. No matter how long it is hidden, it always finds a way to surface. James did not actively seek recognition, But the truth about his compassion and contributions spoke for itself, overcoming the intentions of those who wanted to erase him. This also shows that in a society connected by social media, the voice of the community can become a powerful weapon to reclaim justice. The lesson here is humility and belief in one's own worth. James did not need to shout to prove himself. He let his actions speak for him, and when the time came, the world listened. This teaches us that living authentically, no matter how quietly, will leave an indelible mark. Part 3, the public outcry, escalates the story to a climax with the explosion of social reaction. As the hashtag Justice for James spreads and protesters appear in front of the company, the story is no longer just about James or Helen, but about a larger system that has condoned injustice for too long. The meaning of this part lies in collective power. An individual can ignite a flame, but it is the community that turns it into a wildfire. The company's attempt to appease the public with insincere apologies only highlights their hypocrisy, while the image of James the man who helped homeless children and victims of discrimination becomes a symbol of authenticity. The lesson drawn is solidarity and the courage to speak out. Marcus, Lena, and others in the company stand up not only for James, but also for themselves, showing that change comes not from silence or compromise, but from the decisive actions of those who dare to confront injustice. Part 4, Internal Confrontation, delves deeper into the company, where the cracks in the system are more apparent than ever. The division among employees, one side defending Helen, the other fighting for James, reflects the simmering racial and cultural tensions within American society. The stories from Ade, May, and others about Helen's treatment of them are not just evidence against her, but also testimonies to the forgotten experiences of millions who do not fit the normative mold. The significance here is that injustice never targets just one person. It is a network, and when one thread is pulled, the whole system begins to falter. The life lesson from this part is the importance of empathy and alliance. Marcus and his group fight not only for James, but also for themselves and others who have been marginalized. This reminds us that when we stand up for others, we are also protecting ourselves, and true strength comes from the connection between the oppressed. Part 5, The Unexpected Return, is the culmination of transformation in the story. When James appears on Voices of Change and refuses the offer to return to the company, he not only affirms his self-worth, but also turns failure into opportunity. His forgiveness towards Helen and the company is not weakness, but an expression of inner strength, a strength that transcends hatred and retaliation. The meaning of this part lies in the ability to turn adversity into a catalyst for change. James does not choose the easy path of returning to the company with a higher position. He chooses the more difficult path of expanding Compassion USA to help thousands of others. The lesson here is perseverance and vision. Life is not always fair, but how we react to injustice can define us. James teaches us that sometimes rejecting what is unworthy of us is the most powerful way to assert our worth, and that compassion can become a weapon more powerful than anger. The final part, the remaining lesson, concludes the story with a stark contrast between James's victory and Helen's defeat. Compassion USA becomes a beacon of hope, while the company falls into crisis and Helen retreats into solitude. The profound meaning of this part is the enduring nature of goodness and the inevitable consequences of arrogance. James wins not only because he is right, but because he lives according to his values, while Helen loses not only because her prejudice is exposed, but because she refuses to admit her mistakes. The final image of James raising the sign people our everything in the midst of a diverse crowd, is a symbol of a world where human value transcends all boundaries. But the remaining question on X, how many other Jameses are being overlooked, reminds us that this story is not an end, but a call to continue the struggle. Overall, the significance of James Carter's story lies in how it challenges us to re-examine the unconscious biases within ourselves and society. James is not a superhero with extraordinary powers. He is an ordinary person with extraordinary compassion, and that is what makes him special. The story exposes the fragility of systems built on injustice, showing that no matter how powerful they are, they can collapse when faced with truth and solidarity. It also celebrates the power of forgiveness not as surrender, but as a way to liberate oneself from the burden of resentment. Through Helen, we see that arrogance and stubbornness ultimately lead to loneliness, while through James, we see that kindness and perseverance can open doors that no one expected. The greatest life lesson from this story is that each of us has the ability to create change, no matter how small. James did not start with the intention of changing the world. He just wanted to live authentically and help others. But it was that sincerity that spread from a small corner in Oakland to across America. This teaches us that it is not necessary to have power or fame to make a difference. Sometimes, just a small act of compassion is enough to sow the seeds for a larger movement. James's journey also reminds us that dignity is not something others give us, but something we take for ourselves, even when treated unfairly. He did not let his dismissal define him, but used it as a springboard to rise, proving that a person's true value lies in how they face adversity. Another lesson is the importance of forgiveness and the ability to look ahead. James forgives Helen not to please her, but to liberate himself. This does not mean forgetting or accepting injustice, but choosing not to let it control one's life. His forgiveness is a powerful act, showing that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in rising above what has hurt us. At the same time, his decision to refuse to return to the company and expand Compassion USA demonstrates his vision not just for himself, but for a better world for others. This is a reminder that in life, we do not live only for ourselves, but also for those who will come after us. Finally, James's story teaches us about community responsibility. Marcus, Lena, Diego, Priya, Kyle, and the millions of people online are not just James's supporters. They are his companions, turning his personal story into a collective movement. This emphasizes that no one can fight alone. Real change requires solidarity from those willing to risk speaking out, like Kyle when he leaked the email, to strangers sending words of encouragement online. The lesson here is that we all have a role in correcting the injustices around us, whether through grand actions or small contributions. The final question in the story, how many other Jameses are being overlooked, is a call for each person to look around and ask themselves, are we overlooking someone just because they do not fit our mold? James Carter's journey is not just a story of personal triumph, but a mirror of how to live meaningfully in an unjust world. It teaches us that compassion, dignity, forgiveness, and solidarity are not just ideal values, but real tools to change our own lives and the lives of others. Through James, we learn that no matter how harsh life is, everyone has the strength to stand up, not just to survive, but to create a legacy to be proud of. And through Helen, we see that arrogance and prejudice, no matter how cleverly concealed, will ultimately destroy those who hold them. This story is not just an ending, but an invitation. Let us live in such a way that when we look back, we can say that we did what was right, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us.